quality time is made up. It's all quality time
all
if you
quality
decide
time.
to be
Yeah.
present for it. Isn't Stoicism just supposed to be for men? Isn't it just a masculine philosophy?
I mean, I first learned about it from Martha Nussbaum and Julia Annis. I mean, they're the like examples of womanhood I have. So I probably never gotten that rut.
That's so wonderful because this impression of philosophy of Stoic philosophy being hyper masculine, hyper tough, sort of grit your teeth and bear it. I don't know, when you actually dig in to the Stoic literature, to the lives of the Stoics, it's so much more diverse, it's so much more accessible,
Yeah.
it's so much more universal.
Yeah. Right.
It's weird to have the Epicureans and the Stoics, just those two words mean essentially the opposite of what the philosophy actually meant.
I know. I mean, one way I think of it, and you've probably helped me think of it this way, is that they had so many small S Stoics back then. I mean, it was just the default to be militarily trained, and so I do think of our Stoics as the philosophers, the ones who went against the grain and were doing this academic work.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, even then probably there was that distinction between lowercase Stoic and uppercase Stoic. Yeah. There's that story about Marcus Aurelius where one of his tutors dies and he's crying when they tell him the news. And one of the philosophers, one of his teachers, goes up and says, "Hey, you can't be doing that. This isn't befitting a Stoic." And Antoninus, who seemed to have a much more well-rounded relationship with these things, says, like, let the boy be human.
Yeah.
And I love, that even then they were probably dealing with that stereotype.
Yes. Yeah. And even some of the Greek heroes, they weren't like big readers.
Yes.
So there's like an egghead stereotype too. That,
that's right.
Maybe they weren't ashamed of it, but it wasn't what everyone was doing. It wasn't what all the athletic heroes were doing. They weren't.
Yeah, they're probably making fun of these kids for loving their books and worshiping some philosophical hero instead of some Olympian.
Yeah.
That it was weird and different then too.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of, like, for, Plato to have had those thoughts, like he did have time where he's just reflecting, he's not goofing around and hanging out with the guys all the time because we have the evidence of how thoughtful he was and how intricate all that argumentation was.
Well, even think about, right, when philosophy comes from Greece to Rome, none of the Stoics are there yet, but Cato the Elder, the great-great-grandfather of Cato, is there, and he hears these people talking about these ideas. He hears one of the philosophers sort of arguing one thing one day and another thing the other day, and he's just like, get these people out of here. He wanted them banned from the city.
Yeah.
So he was having that kind of lowercase, S relationship with Stoicism and philosophy, that it was impractical and contradictory and not what like real men should be doing, not what a Roman should be doing.
Right.
And thankfully he loses that battle, but I imagine it took some time for people to sort of absorb this way of being and thinking.
Yeah, right. And so often I think people just assimilate the philosophers we know from ancient times with the time. And it's like, no, they had a difficult time. Like, this was not mainstream.
Yeah. I mean, during the masterclass, we were talking about Socrates. It's like, it is important to remember, like, they killed him. Yes. Like, he was not well liked or well received, and people didn't understand it, and it didn't fit in, and they wanted it to go away.
Yeah, right. I've surprised classes before, not college classes, but teaching some high schoolers, telling them about Socrates. They're like, sounds good. And then his execution comes as a total shock. They're like, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
They didn't do that to him. I'm like, they did.
Yeah, there's this tendency to appreciate the people long after they're gone, but in the moment they were deeply transgressive. I mean, it's funny, even they're not in any way, they had very different missions, but like when you look at some of the approval or favorability polling done on like Martin Luther King during his time, he was not just unpopular with white people, but he wasn't even beloved by all black people. Like that, when you're doing something that's new, it is by definition challenging to people who yeah, a lot of people are dissatisfied with how things are, but for it to be the status quo, it's good for some percentage of people.
Yeah.
And they don't like being challenged or criticized. And so there's always that hesitation and reluctance.
Yes. And then like poor excuses for why they are threatened,
Sure.
which like sends you down different paths because
Yes.
they just say things that aren't even true.
Yeah.
I wish we had more leaders today.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we had more philosophically inclined politicians too. When I was just in Australia, the vice premier of Victoria, which is like one of the states, came to the talk, and like everyone recognized him, but I had no idea who this person was, and so it was this weird thing. But you're just like, it would be so. The idea of politics and philosophy going together seems anathema to us today.
Yeah.
Like one of the most famous moments in American politics is Stockdale saying like, "Who am I? Why am I here?" He as he tried to explain that later, he was saying he meant it like philosophically.
It was so beautiful.
Yeah.
It was such a beautiful thing to say.
Yeah, and then we laughed him off the stage.
Yep.
Like probably exactly the kind of I mean a person who'd actually led people in a real sort of crucible and terrible human experience and come out of it, I mean, he wins the Medal of Honor, but he comes out of it, having served others more than himself.
Yeah.
Like exactly the kind of person you would want
Yeah.
in politics.
Right.
And we're like, doesn't he get how the game is played?
Right,
What
right,
what
yeah.
an idiot not
Right.
understanding how this would seem on television.
Right. What are you, an egghead?
Yeah. We don't want I don't want my debate to be about existential questions.
Right.
I want you to be throwing zingers at the other two people
Right.
on stage.
I want to be ready for everything you say. Like,
Yeah.
I want it to be something I instantly know I agree with and not have to think. That's so depressing.
It's very depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes people will go, like, if I mention political things on Daily Stoic, and they'll say stuff like, what would the Stoics think about you politicize? And I go, well, considering they're all literally politicians, I'm not sure they would have a problem with
I
it.
just think you've done such a good job on that. I loved
Oh,
your
thank you.
most recent book. I had to stop at points and I paced in
Aw.
the room. And I don't remember. I was literally, asking, people who are around me forever. I'm like, have I done this before? And I think it was James Joyce, like Portrait of.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I
Well,
was like,
thanks.
it was a good experience. I mean, it was just like your prose was on fire, and
Oh,
it was
thank
just
you.
so, everything's so couched with academics. So I never get that feeling when I'm reading about the ancient Stoics from academics. I guess that's just not their job to put it directly.
Yeah.
So it was like undiluted. It was like, oh, this is finally.
Why do you think they don't think that that's their job, though? Like, what is it about philosophy today where the idea of writing philosophy that regular human beings would read, understand, and apply to their life, that's like the opposite of the job of a modern philosopher?
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that. I mean, one is kind of just negative, but I think philosophers like others are just hyper worried about their immediate peers. So, I mean, I do that too. Like, we're just imagining like the critic will probably have. So you're writing for other philosophers. Okay, fine. But I think another problem that's been looked at is that we do try and write for the public sometimes, and then we're not good at it. It's so mean. Like, we must think we have these good
Sure.
thoughts, but when it was like some hip magazine, and they were like, I can't believe how many submissions I get from academic philosophers.
Yeah.
And they're really like juvenile, like
Huh.
these really dumbed down ideas. And my thought about that was, those may be the ideas. Like, we get in a different mode if you're writing philosophy, you've got everything around you, you've got every resource. So it's not like stuff off the top of our head.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to fix that. Like, it's good to build on, but it's just not going to be entertaining reading.
Yeah, yeah, sometimes, I mean, obviously being good at something is that you make it look easy. That's like a sign that you've done something well.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is funny, like people who, are more educated than me or have a more prestigious background than me or just don't like what I'm doing, they will dismiss it as if it's like anyone could do it.
Uh-huh.
And my response to that is usually like, by all means, like,
there's
I
no,
would like
yeah,
give it a shot.
yeah.
A lot of other people have written books about Stoicism, and they've, sort of cumulatively sold
Yeah,
like 20
the
copies.
audacity, like the audacity, because I think most people do try and write they try and write op-eds and stuff like that. Things don't catch on, and good luck. I mean, that's like a really complicated formula, and they know they've failed at that. That's a horrible thing for people to say.
We should go back though, and I think we should credit. I mean, it makes it more impressive in retrospect that Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in Greek,
Yeah.
could produce it, not expecting it to ever be published, would publish a work that would last for 20 centuries. Or
Yeah.
that Seneca knew he was writing for an audience, but I mean,
Yeah.
he was writing for the elite of the elite in that time.
Yeah.
And again, it endures for all these centuries.
Yeah.
We don't. There's been a lot of philosophers since the ancients
Yeah.
who had a lot more time, a lot better technology.
Yeah.
They got the benefit of everything that came before, and they haven't surpassed it.
No.
And it kind of blows your mind that these people, in Greece and in Rome, managed to get to the essence of these things, and we, for the most part, have not done better since.
Yeah, right. I wonder if some of it is intimidation. Like Marcus Aurelius didn't have many people to worry
That's
about.
true.
I mean, even like how privileged their status was in the culture, probably good for philosophy. I mean, Plato today might be, serving food for 14 hours a day or something. So, I mean, that's possible, right? Like it was a good environment. Like they felt free to speak their mind, and they got this tutoring in philosophical topics. So yeah, maybe it was like a unique combination of factors.
Yeah, sometimes people go like, would Seneca sell what he's writing? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, Seneca lived in an estate tended by slaves, so the founders too. There was something when we sort of marvel at these breakthroughs in their writing. It's like, well, someone was doing all the work. This is why the
Yeah.
Spartans were such good soldiers. Also, it's like
Right.
they had a slave economy of which they were
Right.
the sort of the creme de la creme, and so like. Maybe the artifice of that was conducive to just thinking all the time. There was
Yeah.
a leisure and subsequent, people. It's more of a,
Yeah.
it's a battle.
Yeah.
And it's a harder. It's hard to just be a full-time philosopher these days.
Yeah, and they if they didn't have peers back then or had a set, like maybe Seneca did, that's different than today, I guess. No one's in that position today, so I can see how that slows people down. But some philosophers today are just very shy. I was a British philosopher, and I think I suggested something. I was like, "Oh, you should put that on you." Like people could really, just blush, like so embarrassed, So I think there might be a personality type attracted to the work also.
Yeah. But in the ancient world, philosophy wasn't this sequestered thing,
Right.
And I think that is something that gets lost. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think I think it's fitting that Zeno sets up the Stoic in the agora, like where the people are. He doesn't. He's not retreating to a forest or a monastery or some remote
right.
location where we talk about these things.
Yeah.
He's like right in the middle where the
Yeah.
people are.
Yeah.
And that's not where philosophy is today. Philosophy's in the tower.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, I have enough trouble. There aren't even that many virtue ethicists among us philosophers. I mean, and the evidence that we need for it would be people trying it out for themselves. I mean, I don't know how we would do it without you. You really are the conduit to the public. There's like nothing I would recommend, that's academic that would replace these introductions. Like, people would just be turned off or not have context. Like, we have to threaten to get students to read this stuff, which I'm not even sure they do. I was looking back over some of my student notes when I taught Stoicism. I'm not even sure they did do the reading, but it's such a, like the incentives are so particular. Do you want a good grade? Do you want a good grade? I mean, that's not like organic. I'm not sure that's.
There's not this hunger for like, how am I supposed to live? How do I know what to do? What's important? There does seem when, and maybe this is such an unrepresentative sample, but like when we think about Athens and Rome, we do think there was it. What's characterize it as this, like, they were fascinated. These were like the big questions. These were the
Yeah.
breakthroughs. These were the people were interested in this stuff. And
Yeah.
obviously,
It would,
the vast majority of people probably
yeah,
could not
right,
care
right,
less.
yeah, totally. Yeah, my students. Yeah. Some schools have been managing, like Notre Dame's done a good job at this. Like they do have students try and live a philosophy, but you know what allows them to do it? It's a religious school.
Yeah.
Like there's some business I will not get into of my students. I'm not going to make them journal for class. There's just something public school about me. Like I don't want to know. And I'm not asking for that, but like they don't mind it whatsoever. They do foster these closer relationships, I think, between the professors and the students, and it's working for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I yeah, that is interesting. The school basically says, like, we're not interested in your spiritual life, right? We're not interested in you finding
We will
meaning
not bother
or
you
purpose.
about that.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that was like the sole purpose of philosophical instruction.
Yeah. Even I've looked at like 19th century pedagogy. I can't remember why. I think it was philosophy of sports. The report cards they used to give kids at the British, are they the public schools, and just about their character.
Yeah.
It's just like, and kind of bullying, just like the boys are not laughing at your jokes and they find you tedious. It's like, oh my God, this is a
Wow.
teacher, like getting so into their business, but they saw it as their job to, direct them in those ways.
Well, I've been reading about this. I'm writing something about Lincoln right now, and so we have some of the books that Lincoln had that Lincoln would, like, his stepmother brings this like one anthology textbook with her, and he reads it like hundreds of times, and it's not filled with like facts and figures. It's filled with like, here's a passage from Shakespeare, and here's from the poet Robert Burns, and then
wow.
here's one of Aesop's fables, and then here's a moralistic quote from
They're like moral lessons.
Yes, they were still like, it's actually an elocution textbook.
Mm-hmm.
So like the purpose of all this stuff was to learn speaking and talking, but the content is moral. So like Seneca, that was what's so fascinating about Seneca. His popularity for like hundreds of years was you were forced to learn him in Latin class because he has these pithy little epigrams.
Yeah, right.
You're just, the byproduct of that is also the moral instruction. You're repeating these things over and over again.
Like fifth graders, like learning their Latin and also getting Cicero, just like, okay, we should have rule of law.
But like when I learned Spanish in high school, they're like, well, I'm wearing socks.
Right.
Like I am from California. Like you're saying nonsense, basically. Like it reduces you into, like, you're learning a language. So linguistically, you're being challenged, but you're being reduced to like an infant.
Right.
So intellectually, you're not being stimulated at all. So linguistically, you can learn like grammar and structure and the definitions of words.
Yeah.
Whereas they're once, maybe they just didn't know to do this, so all they had was like the greatest thinkers from antiquity to practice on.
And it's these major issues that you, of course, will have to weigh. You're going to have to be with or against. I mean, maybe you become this provocative objector to what they're saying. But yeah, it's like real close to the bone stuff. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Now, I mean, I know they've done this even with prison rehabilitation. There was a lawsuit earlier in the 20th century, back in the 20th century, about whether people have a right to not be rehabilitated. It's like, don't I have a right to decide what I'm going to be like? What are you going to train me in? And if that has had an influence on our society, I kind of see my colleagues in psychology and wellness picking up the slack.
Yeah.
And it's a little strange. Like one difference with philosophy is that ancient philosophy, virtue ethics, is that we would test it ourselves. I mean, I know consequentialism. I used to have passages from books of consequentialism that I would show my students, even if we weren't reading the book, where the philosopher author would say, please don't look at my life as any kind of example. I'm a greedy bastard. Like, let's get to ethics, Like, I'd have to do that to calm them down because, like, right away there. But when it comes to, like, wellness, I never think the professors teaching it are good examples themselves. And I don't know if that matters. I also kind of worry about how, like we're kind of taking a what's wrong with this anxious generation approach, and it's just a percentage of young people report, so it's like it's one size fits all. It seems very unphilosophical to me.
Tell me more about that.
Like if we just have to follow the most recent studies on wellness, it just doesn't recognize, I don't know, our agency, ways to opt out, trade-offs, even the data itself. These studies like, come and go.
You mean like smartphone usage with kids and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that kind of, or for college students, just like life advice that's not tied to philosophy kind of creeps me out.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's right. It's like, okay, we have the phones are the problem, we'll ban the phones.
Yeah.
And then instead of going, how do you raise kids who can thrive in a phone environment, phone-free environment?
Limit their own phone use, yeah. And it makes me worried that, like, now I'm thinking about parenting, but I had a few friends who were real cute about admitting because they did attachment parenting, they thought they'd have no problems with their kid. It's just like, that was the deal. And sometimes we give advice in the psychology classes about happiness.
Yeah.
And I worry, I assume the formula won't work. Let's say that. I feel there's not a lot of evidence the formula works. But if you're told this is the formula and then it doesn't work, where are you left? It's like if you're philosophical, you can handle anything. And I wish they would teach them those skills.
Yeah. Like there's this thing in Plutarch that I've been thinking about as a parent. He says, like, let's say you have an estate to leave your children when you die. Like, so parents will spend a long time like trying to craft the perfect will, that says like, if this happens, do this, and then the money goes.
Incentives.
Yeah, the money goes in a trust, and these are the guardians.
Yeah,
and,
right.
Like we spend, because we want to make sure that our kids are taken care of. We think about like this legal document that will do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Instead of, he's saying, like raising kids who have good hearts, good ethics, good relationships with each other, who are self-sufficient, who can just handle it.
Who can handle it.
So we're sort of infantilizing the kids, going like, this is too much for them. They won't be able to handle this. So like, let's get the law involved. Let's get, this document involved.
Right.
And it's kind of what do you want to solve all your kids' problems, or do you want to raise them to be problem solvers?
Yeah, for sure, problem solvers.
Of course.
Yeah. I know. There's something too I think we aren't very stoic about as a culture, with all the focus on just our kids. I mean, I know I sound like a 1950s coach or something, but like, what happened to liking all the kids and, coaching all the kids, hoping all the kids do well in baseball? I miss that. I see it once in a while. I see an old guy like yelling at a bunch of kids at once. I'm like, I can't even tell who his grandkids are. But the way we like specialize our parenting, I worry.
Yeah. I forget who said this, but I was reading something once and they were saying, in some previous, golden age, if someone said, we need to put a pool in for the kids, they meant a community pool.
Yeah.
Now, if you heard someone say that, you'd think they're building a pool in their backyard.
That's
now, this totally belies the fact that the pools were segregated and, nicer neighborhoods had better pools, etc. But the idea that let's build something for the community versus let's do something that's good for everyone, or I need to get advantages for my kids.
Yeah, right. And I mean, I hope this doesn't sound wishful. It sounds a little bitter, but like, according to my kids, it doesn't work anyway. Those sorts of provisions don't work to make a happier kid.
Yeah.
So once in a while they'll tease me, they wish they had something, and then they'll make a joke like, well, at least I have my mental health, as if there's like a correlation. But thinking of the Epicureans, I would not be surprised if there was a correlation. Like, if you aren't happy with little things, like we always had, Charleston's interesting, so we have wealthy people and broke people. And so you'd kind of get to see what happened to the kids after a holiday. I mean, some of the people in our community, the kids hardly get anything for holidays. So, and then some of the kids get so much, like we go to see. I mean, it was a tree house once, like, surprise, like I made you there's a real tree with a tree house all of a sudden. And the kids who got a lot of things just could have cared less about them. Now, maybe they were so young at the point that they didn't know to fake things or whatever. But it was just such an Epicurean lesson. Like, you don't want them spoiled. Like, you really don't want them spoiled. they can be excited about little things, and that's such a sign of health to me. You know, just little simple things.
Yeah, it's totally unfair. Epicurus has this reputation as this hedonist glutton, and there's a letter he writes where some rich friend says like, "I'll give you anything you want," and he's like, "I'd like this little pot of cheese." You know, right. His appetites, instead of doing what the Stoics claim to do, which is like suppress the appetite, eliminate the appetite.
Yeah.
He just has these very small, easily satisfied appetites.
Yeah.
And I think about this sometimes, like just how nice like a glass of ice water is.
Yep.
Like the little pleasures are wonderful, and when you can celebrate them as if they are big pleasures, they become big pleasures. And those things are part of a life worth living.
They really are. I mean, it's like you can feel that joy and appreciation throughout a day if you're recognizing that kind of stuff. I do see it as red flags. Like if my kids, they're cute. Like, you know, they'll tell us to go out and see a sunset or something, and they do appreciate little things, and I just take it as such a check positive. You know.
Yes.
I mean, there could be a lot of things going on if they aren't appreciating those little things, but it is a red flag.
Yeah. No, the ability to find happiness in the ordinary things is incredible. And I think also the skill, I see this as a through line in Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, his ability to find beauty in ordinary things. So it's one thing to look out over the Grand Canyon and be sort of awed by the majesty of it, or a beautiful sunset. Like there are amazing things out there.
Yeah.
But the ability to see beauty and symmetry and artistry in ordinary, regular things that's a much more resilient and necessary skill in a ugly world.
And like in people's behavior, you're making me think that's included too, you know, to be tickled by someone's behavior. And it's just kind of a everyday thing that happens, but it's not the worst thing somebody could have done. That's that's good too. But the hard part about, I mean, I always joke someone should write a book on how to do Epicurean parenting. And then Epicurean scholars are like, Jen, they said don't have kids. I'm like, well, you can just like put that in there. You know, just get past that. I mean, what if you showed up to the philosophy with the kids already? I'm always trying to work around it. But it's a weird thing to imagine in a contemporary situation, because for the kids to enjoy the simple things, they're probably being denied some other regular things that are a little more thrilling,
I guess.
And you never think of, that's not like the trend these days to deny the kids so that they like simple things. I'll give you an example. Like I used to joke that my kids were happy if there was a milk in the fridge, and people would get really mad. Like it would come up like weeks later, like, Jen, are your kids okay? I'm like, yeah, they're okay. Like
well, you're not supposed to drink milk anymore.
They did. Oh yeah, right.
No one's drinking milk.
Right. I am in Charleston, South Carolina. But it's like, that sounds horrible, like negligent parenting, but of course they can handle it, and then of course they are grateful when the milk is there.
Well, I also think as a parent or just as a person, just the practice of noticing little things and being actively grateful for them prevents that sort of creep of entitlement where you're like, this is the new baseline. This is the new baseline. This is the new baseline. And then like today, this thing, it's cool and it's whatever, but I also try to be like, this is not normal.
Yeah.
This isn't going to happen again.
Yeah. No,
this
30
doesn't
people,
say
every
anything
move.
about you.
Yeah. Right.
Because you don't want that to be the baseline.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there'll be that hangover or the unpuffing or it's not easy to adjust after. Yeah. And you'll be a little dissatisfied after if you get attached to those thrilling things. But we love to thrill kids. Like we love to Disneyland and all that. You know, like, I don't know if that's like our childhood, you know, we're trying to like get something back, but it's the trend, right? To thrill and surprise the kids. And the Epicureans would be like, don't thrill and surprise the kids.
But kids are good at kind of humbling you in that sense. Like we just took our kids somewhere and you know, it was this trip and we planned it. It was expensive. And we get there and like, they're like, there's 2 beds in this hotel room, and they're like, I can jump, and they're just jumping from here to there, just, you know. And then it was like, guys, stop having fun. We have to go
Right,
do the trip.
Some serious work to do.
Yeah, and you're like, oh wait, it's like when you get something for your cat and they're excited about the box.
Yeah, right.
And you realize, oh yeah, my definition of what the thing is artificial and silly.
Right.
Anything can be the gift if you have fun with it.
Yes, right.
And I try to go like, it's all part of the trip.
Yes,
this all the trip. The pillow fight in the hotel is more of a treat than the I picked this dinner you're gonna like.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's where the Stoicism comes in handy, though. It's like, here's what we do on this trip. You know what I mean? There just are some norms. Like, what we're gonna do is see the sights. Like, it's not gonna be as gratifying as a pillow fight, but that's what we're gonna do. There's no reason to not pursue these aims here. Yeah.
Well, it's like this quality time is made up. It's all quality time if you decide to be present for it. And I think also, the idea that it's all beautiful, it's all wonderful, these sort of when the Stoics say like the things are, we just have opinions about them, I think is really interesting. So sometimes we have these negative opinions that are nonsensical, and then sometimes we have these positive opinions that are nonsensical. Yeah. But the idea that we have the power to define what this thing means to us is a really important skill.
It is. And I mean, just as you're talking, I'm thinking about that example, and it's like the Epicureans, maybe they do have a tough time getting to adulthood, because if you just like, if the pillow fights are fun and your buddies are fun, like, some of this anxious generation stuff, they act like kids never play out in the woods, but I do know people who really grew up unsupervised and played in the woods, and nothing like magic happens, that you couldn't like detect them from the rest of us at 40 or whatever. So the Epicureans, if they want to satisfy that easily, what they are not going to be able to encourage is like the training. I mean, the drag stuff, like even learning guitar is a good example. Like that is going to subtract some nice time you could have had in your teen years if you learn to play guitar. You're going to be alone and like annoyed with yourself. But what a successful thing to have learned to do for when you're older.
Yeah, there's you could kind of argue that the Epicureans were in this like state of arrested development. Yeah. Where they're like, Terry here in this garden, everything should be wonderful, everything should be fun. Yeah. Let's talk with each other, let's drink and be merry. Yeah. And the Stoics are like, this is all great. Yeah. But who's in charge? Like who's protecting us from being cooking? Overrun by the barbarians? Right. Who's milling this grain that you're eating? Yeah. Who built the aqueducts? Right. Like I think there is an adultness to Stoicism. Yeah. And the idea, maybe as Pericles said something like, your disengagement is only possible by way of the increased engagement of someone else. Oh, and so when the Epicureans sort of check out and say, we're going to be over here, you guys are all taking this too seriously, that has two effects. It makes someone else have to be extra responsible, or, and I think this is kind of the situation we're in now, the irresponsible people who are not aware that they're irresponsible, they're in charge. Like the worst people step up and fill positions of government, influence, culture.
No interest in explaining it to the rest of us. I mean,
or helping, no standards, no virtue.
Yeah,
like if you're not gonna do it, who's gonna do it? And chances are it's gonna be a worse person. Yeah.
It's hard. Like, I mean, I just don't know personally, but some of the people operating politically, I do wonder if they're kind of self-righteous. Like maybe they just think they know what's best for all of us, but they won't tell us that, and they won't engage with us with those arguments. We aren't even worthy of them. I mean, it would have to be that. We aren't even worthy. And it makes me appreciate how the ancients included at least who they did. I mean, explaining yourself, assuming other people can understand argument. I guess like Frank's speech was a way to protect people's civil rights, because you would hear back from other people about policies. And some of the political maneuvering where we aren't consulted, or what's going on in authoritarian governments, is just such an insult to each of us. It's like, aren't we moral lights too? Like we don't get an explanation of what's going on here. And I think some of them think, no, you do not get an explanation of what's going on here.
We do sometimes idealize the ancient world, like, Socrates supposedly lives in this golden age. Yeah. But a big chunk of his life was during the Peloponnesian War.
Yeah.
And then there's this period of the 30 tyrants.
Yeah.
And then there's the democracy, but then he's put to death by the democracy.
Yeah.
So you're like, it's all like, smart people have always woken up in a world that was deranged and weird
right.
and falling apart.
And decisions hidden. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think it's probably been the norm more often than not that people are like, what is happening?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that philosophy's kind of trying to make sense of that. And
right.
clearly there was something going on where the Stoics said, like, let's just focus on what we control, which is us.
Yeah.
Even when they were in positions of power and influence.
Right.
Like Marcus Aurelius, when I read Meditations, it doesn't come across as a guy who felt, who it doesn't feel like he felt like he was in control. Like even he kind of felt like events were in the saddle.
Yeah. But he was open to accountability. Fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So virtue ethics.
Yeah.
What is that?
So there are kind of three main, sometimes people say four, and they include like pluralism, which would be a combination of all of them, but three main approaches that kind of survived into contemporary philosophy today. So one is Kantianism, which like is worked on by some really smart people. It doesn't look real good once you approach it initially, because if you read Kant, I mean, you know, he's like racist, and the arguments are so complex. I had one professor who asked the class to lift up their texts. This is back when we would bring text to class, which is probably a golden era. And he ripped his. He was like, we're done. We're doing something else. He got so frustrated. And he had kind of agreed. He was a great epistemologist, but he agreed to teach Kant to learn it. But it's had a huge influence on the way we respect people's rights, like in medicine. So the idea that you can't violate someone's autonomy no matter what. You know, you might literally know better than the patient, but they get to make that call. That's really Kantian. And then consequentialism, which I know you know well, you know, was a 19th century invention to keep us from doing costly things for reasons that we couldn't explain well. You know?
Okay.
I think the example is always like the penalty for defacing the Tower of London was death. Like a utilitarian can explain, like, that's ridiculous. You know, even though like literally to my students sometimes they'll be like, it kind of makes sense. Like you want people to not do it. Like, you know, a utilitarian will actually figure out the harm you're doing and like for what. So that's a really powerful approach. And you know, economists kind of use it by default, and Peter Singer's used it so effectively. I mean, I think he might have had the biggest influence of any philosopher in recent memory. And then virtue ethics gets really beat up. I mean, I can't believe.
What's the third one?
Oh, virtue ethics would be the third. Pluralism is just some combo of them. I shouldn't insult it because it's very sophisticated, but it's just literally a swirl of all of them. So you pick whatever aspect you like. And then virtue ethics would be, you know, inspired by the ancients and also Confucius, and like, you know, so there's like religious traditions, like, you know, we borrow all of that with virtue ethics, but it gets really mocked by the other practitioners and the other areas of ethical.
Mm-hmm. Why? Because it's stodgy and old-fashioned, or what?
That's part of it. Sometimes they just memorize something false, like that it's circular. I've caught people teaching that, just like, so Aristotle had stupid ideas about it's good to be virtuous because it's good to be virtuous. It's like, that's like, how could you, like, of all the other things he said, you're gonna think he was that dumb in that regard? So I think sometimes it assumes an account of human nature where we're really ethical, so they'll like refute it by pointing out how unethical we are. But virtue ethics shouldn't have a problem with that. You know, some of us are very pessimistic. They've used psychology against virtue ethics, trying to point out that we're so easily manipulated that there's no way that we could take control of ourselves the way virtue ethics suggests. And then the most recent thing I've seen is just probably that it sees us as too like rationalistic. You know, it's just like, we are emotional creatures, and they're trying to deny that part of ourselves. You know, we can't be explained all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of dislike for it.
Yeah, it was funny when I was writing the justice book, because when you read books about justice, you're like, oh, I'll read this book, I'll read this one, and I would read them, and then I'd get to the end and I'd be like, does justice exist?
Right.
Is it even possible?
Right.
And you're like, this can't be, who is this good for?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when you study the trolley problem and you're just sort of like,
Yeah.
wait, so like both choices are bad?
I know.
You know? And then it's this way of kind of reducing everything to this complexity that then makes it impossible to, it's funny. It not only makes it impossible, but then like when you go, well, what do you do in your life? And they're like, well, I do X, Y, or Z. Like, you're like, oh, you're dispensing with this entire, this is just this weird thought experiment.
Yeah.
Like thing, but that, yeah, it's like not real. Well, I don't know what it is. What are we doing here? You know?
Yeah. Justification, like justification of a system, and they don't always tell you what system. It's like, well, you could throw in any system. It's like, I'd like that. One thing I loved about your book was how you gave, I feel like these are very rare, but you gave examples of what I would call like Stoic sayables, like literal descriptions of what it would be good to do. And so if I remember, like, right, one example would be, I don't cross a picket line or something like that. So like that might be a case where the person themselves generates the rule.
Yeah.
It lasts as long as they think it should last. You know, they fit it with everything else. It might not fit, and that's going to nag at them, and then they'll reconcile that. And time would be this optimism about virtue ethics. But those sorts of down to earth examples are so rare, and I've seen virtue ethicists misinterpreted because the other ethical theorists will assume we're talking about highfalutin principles and somehow hiding them too. You know, just like I can't tell you what it is. It would be a paragraph of a sentence. I mean, Kant has principles like that, so maybe that's what. But you gave examples of what I have found, like in Musonius Rufus, like simple things like educate your daughters like your sons. Like let's run with that. Let's try that. Like that reconciles some things. You know. I love that because that's so useful in a life. Like I've really dumb ones. Like my kids and I will always stop to buy a little palmetto rose from a kid that's selling them on the street. Like it's like that's like our rule. We know it's it's going to be overridden.
I love rules like that. Like I don't recline my seat on airplanes.
That's awesome.
Just like what are where you go, okay, I thought about this and like everyone else does it this way.
Yeah.
But that's not the kind of person that I want to be.
Yeah.
And so what are the rules that you set for yourself that you try to stick to? And it can be like, I think part of people seem to think their job as a philosopher is to like poke holes in that rule.
Uh-huh.
Like I heard a vegetarian talk once about how like people seemed to be much more adamant about them being a vegetarian than they were. So like they'd be like, I'm a vegetarian, and then they'd be like, well, do you eat fish?
Oh, yeah.
And like instead of just going like, oh, you have this sort of moral framework, this set of rules, this thing that you try to do more often than not.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
We're like, well, let me show you how that doesn't matter.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
let me show you how that's contradictory. Let me show you how, well, have you heard about this?
So destructive.
Yeah. Oh, you drive an electric car? Let me tell you about cobalt mines.
Yeah.
You're actually a garbage person.
Right.
And like, there's a way to do this. And like, I think the purpose of it is to just make everything a confusing morass of shittiness.
Yeah.
That you just do whatever's easiest.
Yep.
And like if we feel like someone else has some moral clarity, instead of going like, that must be nice, good for you, we go like, let me muddy that up for you, so then I can just do whatever I want.
It's a horrible situation. I mean, I didn't really see it coming, but I do see it. Like people are so, the way I interpret it is they're so sensitive to any moral criticism, so maybe they do the criticizing, or they're trying to be, do things, have exact opinions, but it's not about their behavior.
Yeah.
I'll see it on, women my age were on the Facebook, and I've gotten criticism for sharing a memorial service where balloons will be released. So these are like grieving parents, and people will point out to me the harm done by the balloon, like right there where the parents can see it. It's like that kind of like, they're so frozen in whatever they're doing. It's not changing their behavior.
Yeah.
I don't know what is going on.
Yeah, people, I don't know. There's like this sort of high-minded version of it where philosophers sort of make it clear that like everything is confusing and contradictory.
Yeah.
And then like there's the Facebook version of it where like, what about this?
Yeah.
Like, why haven't you said anything about this?
Think of how
what about
passive you
this?
are while you're writing that.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
like, I'm not going to memorialize these kids or anything, but
Well, we call it whataboutism, right?
What
and so
about?
it's like somebody's doing this, somebody has clarity, someone's speaking up about some cause, and they go, but what about this?
yeah, right.
And that's, both things can be important. Or this one is important to this person. You have no moral obligation
Yeah.
to care about literally everything that's happening in the world.
No.
We all have to pick our battles. And by the way, if we all did pick our battles and we all made a positive difference somewhere,
Yeah.
it would cumulatively have an enormous impact. We
Yes.
all have to be on the same page.
Yeah, it's a great, like, when people gather the data about our choices, like, yeah, I feel like a Stoic should suck that up. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, I think there was recently some work by economists on conscious consumption. Maybe it doesn't always work the way you expect. Okay, great. Just
Yeah.
like that's, you couldn't figure that out on your own. You need people to gather the data. But the idea that anyone doing something thinks it's perfect
Yeah.
is so strange. Like, it's like we all know what balloons are, like we kind of weighed the cost of it. Like, I'm not going to interfere with this culture where I live to make that point or to stop that harm from happening. And the idea that we don't know that, or even the idea, I don't know how this seems reflected in those sorts of criticisms, but maybe people like that are very fearful that they're not doing everything perfectly.
Yes.
But like a Stoic assumption should be, of course we're not doing it. Just like I just made up this rule.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just like I made it up. So like
Yeah.
I've been trying it for a few years, but yeah, trust me, I know it maybe could be modified, abandoned, or perfected.
Yeah, Cato seems to have been in this. Cato's this fascinating figure to me because you can't help but admire his principles and his steadfastness and his commitment. And then he's also like, it seems like utterly exasperating and impossible to work with. And Cicero said something like, he thought he lived in Plato's Republic and forgot he lived in the dregs of Romulus. Like, he lived in Rome, a flawed, broken, hegemonic empire, and because he couldn't compromise, because he wouldn't work with people, ultimately he's such a logjam in the system that enough pressure builds up that Caesar destroys the whole thing. And so like your sort of moral purity and what we would today call virtue signaling can come at the expense of actual virtue. Like I see this now with a bunch of political issues that I prefer not even to talk about because I don't want to deal with the emails coming in, but like the alternative is much fucking worse. So like you're attacking instead of trying to persuade or incentivize the person to do a little bit better, and accepting that, by the way, there probably isn't going to be an ideal situation here. You're willing to throw it to the much worse person. And how do you think that's going to go for the people that you claim to care about?
It's like a clean hands thing, right?
Yes.
It's like I mean, I get crabbier in my older age, and it's like I really respect people out there doing stuff.
Yes.
I mean, you get to a point where it's like there's a lot of talk that goes on for a long time. I mean, I just get disappointed by it. Like in our little community, we'll have so many events like against gun violence. Nothing wrong. Like who's against and against gun? Like this could unite us all, and people won't like leave their houses to go. I figure everybody's watching TV or something, but you have to put in, there has to be something behind your opinions. You have to test them in action, right? Or they're just.
Well, I mean, America, you look at when you look at the very strong opinions that people have, and then you look at like the percentage of people who vote, and you're like, this doesn't add up. And you have confused having the opinion with being the contribution. And then you can't do literally the smallest thing to potentially contribute to a solution.
Someone told me once that what stuck out the most to them about Americans is that we got offended if people argued with us. I didn't really see Americans that way. It's like, seems like we're arguing all the time. But I do have to take care with, I have to be gentle in telling my students they're wrong. Like I do get the sense people get pretty offended by being corrected. I mean, maybe I even, you could see that on social media, I guess. You have to be kind of gentle or people just take it so personally. And that's like there's potential there, because if we took it less personally when we got corrected, there really could be better arguments made, shared back and forth.
Yeah. It's I don't know, when you talk to young people, what's your way in on Stoicism? That's a question I get the most. Like, how do you I want to talk to I want to turn my teenager onto Stoicism, or I want to talk to my kids about it. Like they're like, I wish I'd heard about this earlier. How can I do better? And you talk to high school students and college students, like, what seems to flip the switch on for them?
I mean, I feel like you're the one who knows the answer to that, because I do not. Like, it's not like my students have liked it so much. So, like, I'll teach an advanced philosophy class in it, and at that point, they've kind of already gotten used to the philosophy they like. It's not going to be Stoicism. I mean, it's not in Philosophy 101 courses. It's so difficult to read. They have to get into the secondary literature, that's pretty advanced. Like, that's grad student kind of work, and I've got these undergrads. So what happens is that I always have a batch of students. Like, I'll put it in Philosophy 101, that they recognize it from their families. It's so adorable. Like, just like, that's what my grandparents were like. Like, I didn't know there was
something
a word
about
for
Stoicism that feels familiar if you know or admire someone who's, like, pretty old.
Yeah, right. And grew up. I'm thinking of stories growing up on a farm. It's like, and that's very beautiful, because they'll be like, I didn't even know there was a description for this kind of thing. And they also kind of tend to be good at it too. They kind of have a sense of it, so they can figure the rest of it out. But it's a hard sell. I mean, it's so my way in lately to, like, get them to be, I don't know what, I'm not really trying to get them to be anything, but I've been using critical thinking class in a way that I think is wholesome, because they begin by taking an argument that annoys them from somebody, like a real person, so not just a soft thing they, like, imagine. I guess we do a lot of imagining of arguments that haven't been made. And then they have to steel man it. They have to make it really strong. And then they refute it in a paper. So calm, so careful. And I just wrote a paper on how that is so similar to practical rationality. Like, that's what we should be doing ourselves. Seneca has some examples of arguing with himself. I mean, we should be doing that with our own claims. So I feel like
I've always
that's
admired that about Seneca, like his familiarity with the schools that he disagreed with, that he could clearly quote much of Epicurus from memory.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, this guy, he's reading the competition.
Yes, for
as
sure.
opposed to just the same confirmations of his arguments.
Yeah. I mean, that is, like, the way. I mean, I always had some friends who worked on academic skepticism, and that's a pretty cool way to learn stuff too. Just kind of follow something until it makes sense. You're not interfering early on. I think a lot of my students who aren't into Stoicism, they're interfering early on, like, not interested in being Stoic. Just like, I don't even want to like this, right? I mean, I'm with Hegel or whatever, so not doing that is a really good methodology.
Yeah, the preconceived notions get in the way of so many things that could change us.
Or that you have to, like, approve or not before you're done. You know what I mean? Yes. Like, I don't really like it. It's like, hold on, like, hear them out. I mean, I think a lot of the scholars who work on ancient philosophy, they have that kind of academic skeptical style, because they'll really detail, like, Epictetus on roles, but you don't know if that's You don't know if they internalize that or if they, I'm always dying to know, but you can't really tell what their own thoughts are because they're just laying out the arguments.
That has been interesting to me. I've talked to Martha a couple times, and obviously I like her work, but I don't get the sense that, like, she likes Stoicism necessarily.
No, yeah.
Like, she's written about it eloquently, and she knows it backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
But I don't think she would say, like, I am a Stoic, or even that I agree with Stoic philosophy, which there is something odd about that to me, in the sense of, like, well, why, like, you only get one life. When you dedicate it to something that you're,
what would you pick? When
you pick the thing that you like,
and
sometimes I'll read biographies, and it's like, it's not that the biographer doesn't love the person they're writing about, but they don't hate them either,
right?
And so I'm just like,
what's going on here?
You just spent 8 years writing about this person you have an ambivalent opinion about. Like, I can tell, I do feel like I'm sort of like asking myself, why am I reading this? I'm sensing your ambivalence. I don't know. I feel like you got to decide whether you like it or not.
there's also like, I mean, one thing I think you're doing is like building the view. Like, we don't have to pretend these views are dead. Like, let's keep improving them. I mean, I love Larry Becker's work, A New Stoicism. That was new and convincing to people who never would, some people just don't have a taste for ancient philosophy. And that was convincing to a lot of philosophers who have never picked up something translated. So we don't have to be done with it. You can like fix what you don't like. It's pretty simple.
The idea that it was already old by the time Seneca got to it and Cicero got to it and Marcus Aurelius got to it. Like, I mean, you're talking about a thing that's 400 or 500 years old.
Right.
So they obviously didn't think it was done.
Right.
They were adding all sorts of stuff to it.
You get to add.
The idea that like Marcus Aurelius is the pinnacle of Stoicism and nothing can be added or subtracted.
Right.
I mean, there's Stoic physics. I think we all agree that's nonsense.
Right.
And we don't even dignify it by talking about it.
There is a small group of modern Stoics who, though. Actually.
But I'm just saying, it's like physics without a microscope. Like, who cares? Right. So like physics or Stoic ethics before, we could agree that slavery was wrong is slightly insufficient.
Yeah, right.
And we've had these breakthroughs and understandings since that should color and inform what we take and don't take.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like we're all philosophers. I mean, that's like we all have that role to play. Yeah, I guess it's hard for me to understand why people wouldn't do that.
Well, the Stoics give us explicit permission to do this. They're like, what Seneca's talking. He says, so and so said this, so and so said this, so and so said this. But what have you said?
Yeah.
He's like, the way you honor these philosophers is by adding to it.
Yes.
And so we shouldn't see it as a dead philosophy. It's very much an alive philosophy, and that there is space and room for everyone to contribute.
It's not dogma, it's like what Plato introduced. And with Nussbaum, I mean, my take is just that ethical theory is restricting for her. She just doesn't see the need for it. It helps discipline my thoughts. I mean, I'm not like a good Stoic, but like I really like having it as a framework, because then when I do, like, I'm very angry at my colleagues right now. Like, at least I know I know how to make sense of it. I don't like endorse it, but she's just so careful at looking at whatever she wants to look at. I can see how people might see it as constricting, like, wait, why would I have needed it again? I understand it. I can pull on it if I want. She's now using it to explain emotion. So, but she can borrow from it what she wants. I kind of get that.
Yeah, that's true. No, I mean, she's great. She's made numerous contributions to philosophy, whether she likes it or not.
Gosh.
But Cicero is similar, where it's sort of like, he's like, here's what they all said. But he was clearly ambivalent at some level. He's like, it's not for me. I know it all, and I use some of it, but I don't, it seems tough.
Right. He doesn't need it to be like a framework the way I need it to be a framework. Maybe that's just where people end up. What do you need?
So are you working on a book?
Yeah, it's so hard.
This Epicurean parenting book, or no?
No, I would probably never get permission.
You don't need permission?
The joke is that it would be like you open it and it's like, don't.
First,
it's like,
don't.
take it easy.
First,
it's very
don't.
stressful.
If you disregarded step one, okay, fine.
Oh yeah, that would be good. Yeah, that would be the next part. Yeah, I'm working on like Stoic economics, and I've made it so complicated, so I need to simplify it, which is hard. I mean,
Stoic economics, what do you mean?
Like the idea that material goods are indifferent, and the way that might help us. We have trouble explaining what economists are doing. Frankly, economists have trouble explaining. Like, that's what I've been looking at. Like, once they finally tell us in simple English, like how it doesn't all fit together. And I think the Stoics have a really good solution for it, and it's that economists can model whatever they want, but please don't bring in like ethical claims. They're modeling like our preferences in regard to indifference. And it sounds so simple, but we have spent a lot of time trying to apply. I mean, some wonderful philosophers have tried to like impose ethics on economics, and I just kind of see it as a study of indifference. And I mean, that's how the Stoics put it. So I'm just like pushing their line, I guess.
I don't know how much he talks to about it, but I know Adam Smith was very informed by the Stoics, and one of his teachers was like a translator of the Stoics.
Yes, I have not read it. I keep being told I have to read his teacher to understand him. It's like, darn.
Have you read A Theory of Moral Sentiments?
Yeah, it's so hard for me because the Stoicism comes in and out.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of, to me, the ancients are hard enough. Like, sometimes I'm like, I got to stick with them. Like, I can't learn Schopenhauer because I'm going to mix them up with everyone. But with him, it's particularly hard for me because if I have this right, so he admires Stoicism and thinks it's descriptive of a few people.
Yeah.
But then, like, the rest of us, he's like, don't worry about ethics. Like, you're just going to follow these. There's an economist who calls it like a bourgeois virtue, and that seems to be like what the rest of us get. Like, we show up on time, we do our jobs, we're honest, we have a duty to our job, but it's not the real thing. It's not like she calls it's not ethics by its true name or something. So
all right, well, I can't wait to read it.
Me. Yeah that's hard.
Well, this was awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.